Hi, I'm Judy from AP World History class, and today I'll be introducing to you Renaissance in Italy. So what exactly is the Renaissance? The term Renaissance refers to the revival of classical Greek and Roman values. The Renaissance was a time of significant contributions to Western civilization, with achievements in literature, art, philosophy, and political and historical thought. Notions such as patronage, individualism, humanism, and three-dimensional art with perspective were developed during the Renaissance. It also led to the beginnings of the Reformation, with Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses to the church door, and all that splits in religion. Following the Middle Ages, which is also known as Dark Ages due to the experience in cultural decline, and the bubonic plague that caused the deaths of approximately 15 million people sought to put their attention on classical text. Society in the Middle Ages was very rigid and was only limited to being devoted to religion, while society during the Renaissance was secular in terms of flourishing people's spirit. The revival of the classical texts allowed Europeans to become acquainted with that part of the classical heritage that had been lost during the Middle Ages. The beliefs of classical writers such as Cicero, Plato, Aristotle fascinated the Italian writers. Plato, in particular, influenced the Italians with the belief that ideals such as beauty and truth exist beyond our ability of our senses to recognize them, and that we can train our minds to make use of our ability to reason to get beyond the limits imposed by our senses. The European Renaissance was divided into two time periods. First, the Italian Renaissance, and later the Northern Renaissance. I wonder how it started. The Italian Renaissance began with the rise of the Medici family, who came to power after a struggle between various Italian states. Our family won the battle now, and I'm going to make the Medicis great again. We're going to be rich and become the most powerful. The Medici family used the wealth gained from banking to establish themselves first as the rulers of the Florentine Republic. Besides, spurs in the economy were also a major factor during the Italian Renaissance. One of the crucial factors that made Italy the birth of the Renaissance was that the Italian city-states were generally more economically vibrant than the rest of Western Europe after the fall of the Middle Ages. Merchants were carrying wool and silk to every part of the continent, while the Italian bankers, the Medicis, provided loans for other European monarchs. I need some money. Sure. Generally, wealthy Italian merchants began to sponsor artists to make secular art forms such as portraiture that would illustrate them and their accumulated wealth to the greatest efforts. This was the beginning of the concept of patronage, or the idea that a person or a group of people pay for the creation of an artwork. A new belief that celebrates the human spirit known as humanism also developed along with the widespread application of patronage. It also depicts a philosophical view of the world, including the studies of rhetoric, history, and literature. Francisco Petrarch is often considered as the father of humanism. Petrarch was dissatisfied with his career as a lawyer and decided to study the classics. Illiterate in medieval Latin from his study of law, Petrarch learned classical Latin as preparation to study the classical texts. Petrarch set out to read the originals and quickly found himself engaged with such works as the letters of Cicero. Despite being accused of turning to the pagan culture of Greece and Rome, Petrarch continued his fascination with classical culture and refused to reject Christianity. He argued for the universality of the ideas of the classical age. Petrarch's work served as an inspiration to a group of wealthy Florentines known as the Civic Humanists. Civic Humanists were people who combined active political participation with classical education. They viewed Cicero's work in political causes as justification for the public good. Overall, the Renaissance humanists branched out in different directions. Some writers strove to describe the ideal man of the age. In Castellanos the courtier, such a person would be a man who knew several languages, who was familiar with classical literature, and was also skilled in the arts. This type of person we might label today as a Renaissance man. A well-known example of a Renaissance man was Leonardo da Vinci, who was both a scientist and an inventor. Not only did men enjoy the privileges during the Renaissance, women were also affected by the new humanist teachings. Throughout the Middle Ages, there were women, very often attached to nunneries, who learned to read and write. During the Renaissance, an increasing number of wealthy secular women picked up these skills. The humanist scholar Leonardo Bruni went to a further extent when he created an educational program for women. An example of women receiving the rightful education as men was Christine de Pizan, who was the daughter of the physician to the French King Charles V. She wrote The City of Ladies to go against the notion that women were inferior and immoral. in contrast to women during the Middle Ages. The women in the Renaissance period were more engaged in celebrating themselves, and they sought more opportunities to become an intellectual and enjoy privileged status as being Renaissance elite. One of the most notable contributions made to Western culture may have been the fine arts of the Renaissance. And were more curious about the capability of being an individual. Renaissance artists sought prestige and money by competing for the patronage of secular individuals such as merchants and bankers. They sponsored art that would glorify their achievements rather than deliver a spiritual message that was settled in medieval art. The patrons demanded a naturalistic style, which was aided by the development of new artistic techniques and the rejection of the old practices. Oil painting became the dominant method in Italy. The practice of chiaroscuro, or the use of contrast between light and dark to create three-dimensional pictures and single-point perspective, allowed artists to create more realistic settings for their work. The end of the 15th century marked the beginning of the High Renaissance, in which the center of sharing ideas moved from Florence to Rome. Popes were very interested in the arts and sought to beautify their city and their palaces by sponsoring artists. The four notable High Renaissance artists were Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Michelangelo, and Donatello. As mentioned earlier, da Vinci was considered a Renaissance man. He was a military engineer, an architect, a sculptor, a scientist, and an inventor. His sketchbooks reveal workable designs for submarines and helicopters. Leonardo da Vinci's famous works include the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, and the Vitruvian Man, the Lady with an Ermine, and his self-portrait as extra. By the way, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo were also suspected of being homosexual, despite being in the age of traditional notions of a boy and girl relationship. But who cares? It's a period of celebrating human spirits and rights. Raphael came from the beautiful Renaissance city of Urbino and died at the early age of 37. He was given important commissions in the Vatican palaces, as he links his time with the classical past in the school of Athens, which shows Plato and Aristotle standing together in a fanciful classical structure that uses the single-point perspective characteristic of High Renaissance style. Like Leonardo, and unlike Raphael, Michelangelo was skilled in numerous areas such as sculpting and painting. His masterpiece David was commissioned by Florence as propaganda to inspire the citizens in their struggle against Milan. Michelangelo was sponsored by 4 different popes. Most notably, Pope Julius II gave Michelangelo the task of creating his tomb. Julius II also employed Michelangelo to work on the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. Michelangelo exemplified his final work in the Sistine Chapel, the brilliant yet disturbing final judgment, as he had lived to see the style of the art in Italy change from the High Renaissance to the tormented style of the Late Renaissance. At last, Donatello was known for his sculpture of David made of bronze. Historians tend to know more about Donatello's life rather than his character and personality. He was known as a man with a simple taste that never gets married. Unlike the popular Michelangelo, who got sponsored by many patrons, Donatello was a man who pursued artistic freedom as he was not affected by the regulated guild rules. Now, with all 4 Renaissance artists gathered together, we have the Ninja Turtles. Speaking of Renaissance arts, let's talk about the architecture developed during the period of flourishing art culture. Architecture during the Middle Ages was dominated by the Gothic style. The Gothic style had thinner walls in contrast to the Romanesque style architecture from the past, with stained glass windows and pointed arches to reach God. The features of Renaissance architecture included mathematical ratios of height and width combined, for a desire to reach symmetry, proportion, and harmony in response to ancient Greek and Roman ideals. Columns, pediments, arches, and domes were in dominant use as well, again, derived from the ancient world. The primary focus for Renaissance architects was the abundance of Greco-Roman ruins scattered across southern Europe, particularly in Italy. These ruins included basilicas, Roman baths, aqueducts, amphitheaters, and temples, some of which, like the well-preserved Pantheon in Rome, serve as significant sources of study. architects examined these structures, taking measurements and creating detailed drawings. Additionally, they explored Byzantine buildings, particularly domed churches, as well as elements of Romanesque and medieval architecture. While some Italian architects viewed the Gothic style as a foreign intrusion that deviated from Italian traditions, Renaissance architecture aimed to reconnect with Italy's historical origins, even though medieval architectural influences were not entirely forsaken. Overall, the styles that evolved during the Renaissance included Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and Tuscan. The Italian Renaissance eventually allowed people to experience tremendous art flourish, increase in knowledge, and economic growth. The Renaissance movement eventually spread northwards and created the Northern Renaissance, with writers such as Thomas More and Desiderius Erasmus helping shape the idea of human idealism. Additionally, the English Renaissance, a branch of the Northern Renaissance, included the production of famous works of William Shakespeare such as Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet. The Italian Renaissance, in general, spurred the flourishment in art culture and interest in learning the works of the past. And that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. The end. Special thanks to those channels where I took the clips from, and I hope you all have a nice day.